The Grand Galactic War Council chamber was by any standards an impressive feat of interspecies architecture. Suspended in a perfect zero-gravity bubble at the nexus of 7 major trade routes, the chamber had been deliberately positioned to ensure no single species could claim territorial advantage. Its vast dome ceiling captured and amplified the bioluminescent orbs that floated, seemingly at random, each one calibrated to the precise spectrum that would appear most official and intimidating to at least 3 council species. Along the curved walls, holographic threat displays shimmered, with real-time updates from across 47 distinct territories, each projection speaking in 16 dimensions of data. The chamber's acoustics had been designed by the Harmonic Collective, a species of pure sound waves, who had spent 3 centuries perfecting a balance that would allow gaseous delegates to perceive vibrations while preventing crystalline representatives from shattering during particularly heated debates. Today, every square centimeter of the Council's ceremonial space buzzed with an intensity not seen in 14 galactic standard cycles. For the first time in recorded memory, the chamber was at maximum capacity, all 47 member species present physically or through quantum proxies. Their variously shaped appendages, sensory organs, and consciousness matrices all focused on a single point: the High Chancellor's podium. The High Chancellor of the Galactic War Council, a luminous being whose form resembled a perpetually shifting nebula contained within a vaguely humanoid outline, was currently cycling through alarm spectrums. The Chancellor's normally controlled energy field crackled with stress discharge as it prepared to deliver the gravest news in Council history. Seated precisely 3 meters to the Chancellor's right, in an adaptive ergonomic chair designed to accommodate any galactic species, a marvel of engineering that had won the Melding Prize for Inclusive Design, was Earth's lone diplomat. The human, as they were simply known to the Council, sported what the Earth records had designated as business casual attire, a navy blue suit jacket over a white shirt without the customary strangling neck device other humans seemed to prefer in formal settings. The outfit was completed with neatly pressed trousers and sturdy black shoes that gleamed under the chamber's dramatic lighting. The human had been chosen through Earth's peculiar lottery of the competent, a system where all individuals who passed basic diplomatic screening and expressed interest were entered into a random selection process. This method had baffled many council species who spent lifetimes breeding engineering or metaphysically transforming their representatives. But Earth had insisted this approach best represented humanity's approach to the cosmos. Currently, the human appeared fascinated by their adaptive chair's swivel function, occasionally turning a full 360 degrees during lulls in the proceedings. Several delegates had initially interpreted this as a complex territorial display or meditation technique, until the human had cheerfully explained they simply found it pretty neat. The chamber quieted as the High Chancellor's energy form condensed into its most authoritative configuration. When it spoke, its voice resonated with precisely calibrated gravitas. Esteemed War Council members. The Chancellor began its voice, translating simultaneously into 47 native languages through neural implants, atmospheric vibrations, telepathic pulses, and various other perception modes. We face not one, but 2 existential crises that threaten our collective existence. The holographic displays intensified, showing twin horrors spreading across opposite ends of the galaxy. On the left, the quantum plague, a reality-corrupting infection that consumed stars and transformed civilizations into mathematical paradoxes. On the right void, locusts, planet-sized entropy accelerators, disguised as harmless insectoid swarms, until they devoured the fabric of space-time itself. A ripple of alarm traveled through the chamber. The empathic clouds in the upper tier began absorbing and amplifying the collective dread, their normally wispy forms condensing into dark thunderheads. The crystalline mines from the Rigel quadrant emitted high-frequency distress tones that caused their elaborate structures to vibrate perilously. The gravitational purists. sentient gravity wells, usually content to observe, from the chamber's lowest point began pulling small objects toward them in an unconscious threat display. Through it all, the human remained, remarkably still. They had ceased their chair rotation and were now observing the holographic displays with what appeared to be mild interest. As the Chancellor detailed the 12 billion casualties already suffered from the quantum plague's first wave, the human reached into their jacket pocket and withdrew an archaic recording device, what Earth records identified as a notebook and pen. The Chancellor paused momentarily, its luminous form flickering in confusion, before continuing. Both threats will reach our core territories within exactly 408 standard cycles. Our best scientific consensus gives us a survival probability of 0.0034%. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of distress signals. The Hive Consortium representatives split into their component entities. The quantum collective began spawning probability simulations so aggressively that small tiers in reality briefly opened and closed around their delegation pod. The temporal observers, normally forbidden from revealing future knowledge, began emitting paradox warnings so severe that the chamber's chronological stabilizers activated emergency protocols. Throughout this pandemonium, the human delegate appeared to be humming. The sound, barely audible above the chaos, was what their cultural database identified as elevator music. Their pen moved across the paper in smooth, unhurried strokes. Every few seconds they would look up at the displays, nod thoughtfully, and continue writing. The whispers began almost immediately. "Is the human implementing some sort of psychological warfare technique?" murmured the chief telepathic amalgam to its nearest neighbor, a coalition of sentient microbiomes. Perhaps their species perceives time differently, offered the quantum collective's primary node. What appears to us as minutes might be experienced as centuries in their consciousness. Biological malfunction suggested a crystalline mind, its facets reflecting the human's calm expression in countless fragmented images. "Impossible," countered the xenobiological expert, a gelatinous entity whose transparent form contained constantly shifting anatomical diagrams of every council species. "I have been monitoring their vitals. Heart rate steady, cortisol levels minimal, brain activity focused but relaxed. They appear to be in what humans term a good mood." This last piece of information sent a fresh wave of alarm through the delegates. The human was in a good mood while facing dual extinction events. What could possibly explain such a response? The High Chancellor, attempting to regain control, raised its luminosity to attention-demanding levels. "If we may continue with the crisis assessment." But the chamber's attention had irrevocably shifted. The human remained oblivious to the stir they had caused, continuing to take notes and occasionally pressing a button on their wrist device, what Council records identified as a watch, to check Earth's time relative to Council standard. As the Chancellor resumed its briefing, detailing how the quantum plague corrupted the very laws of physics in affected regions, turning matter into metaphors and causality into suggestions, the delegates found themselves watching the human more than the apocalyptic projections. The probability matrices. A species comprised entirely of living mathematical formulas began running increasingly desperate calculations. The human's behavior defies predictive modeling, their prime equation announced voice oscillating in confusion. When we input the current threat data to their known psychological parameters, we get impossible outcomes. The only explanation is that they possess information we do not. This conclusion rocketed through the council chamber, amplified by panic and desperate hope. The human must know something. They must have a solution, a weapon, a defensive strategy so assured that extinction barely warranted concern. None of the delegates dared ask directly. In the delicate dance of interstellar diplomacy, appearing less informed than another species constituted a grave loss of standing. Instead, they competed to demonstrate how unconcerned they too could appear. The quantum collective began shutting down their probability simulations with theatrical casualness. The empathic clouds forced themselves to project calm, their storm fronts unnaturally brightening. The crystalline minds attempted to arrange their facets in perfect replication of the human's relaxed posture, causing several delegates to crack under the unaccustomed configuration. Meanwhile, the High Chancellor continued its briefing, now detailing the void locusts, massive entropy accelerators, that disguised themselves as ordinary spacefaring insectoid swarms until they reached critical mass within a solar system. The holographic display showed disturbing footage of an entire civilization from the outer rim, discovering too late that the strange bugs they had considered a minor agricultural nuisance were actually dismantling reality on a quantum level. The void locusts consume negative space. The Chancellor explained its luminous form, dimming with concern. They digest the possibility of emptiness, causing matter to collapse in on itself, until entire star systems become singularities. At this news, widely considered the most horrifying revelation of the session, the humans' behavior shifted in a way that sent the Council into complete disarray. The humans slouched. The movement was subtle, their spine previously maintaining what Council xenobiologists had identified as adequate professional posture, gradually relaxed into what could only be described as comfortable repose. Their shoulders lowered approximately 2.3 centimeters. Their head tilted back slightly to rest against the chair's adaptive cushion. The posture perfectionists from the Cygnus arm, beings whose entire evolutionary path had optimized around precise skeletal alignment, began emitting distress pheromones so potent that the chamber's atmospheric filters engaged emergency sequestration protocols. Liquid spine syndrome, whispered the chief xenobiological expert, transparent form clouding with confusion. But that's impossible in their species without major trauma. The harmonic collective detected a subtle change in the human's breathing pattern, slower, deeper. They are implementing respiratory alteration techniques, the collective's ambassador vibrated urgently. Possibly to enhance oxygen delivery to their brain in preparation for extreme cognition. Or combat, suggested a martial theology representative, whose species worshipped conflict as divine expression. The changed breathing pattern matches pre-battle meditation in 7 known warrior cultures. The High Chancellor attempted once more to redirect attention to the existential crisis at hand. The quantum plague will reach the Arterian system in 52 cycles, and the void locusts will enter Council space through the Polaris Gateway in 89 cycles. We have prepared evacuation scenarios but must emphasize, it was at this precise moment that the human diplomat did the unthinkable. Their eyelids began to lower. Gradually, imperceptibly at first, then with increasing commitment until they had closed completely. Their head already relaxed against the chair's support, tilted slightly forward. Their breathing, previously the subject of intense speculation, settled into a slow, rhythmic pattern that the Council's xenobiological database immediately identified as Stage 1 sleep. The human had fallen asleep during the most catastrophic briefing in galactic history. For 3 full seconds, the Council chamber was utterly silent, a phenomenon unprecedented in its centuries of operation. Then, all at once, pandemonium erupted. The quantum collective's probability engines overloaded simultaneously, creating a brief but alarming cascade of alternative realities within a 3-meter radius of their delegation. The empathic clouds absorbed so much confused emotion that they temporarily achieved sentience density, raining emotional condensation onto the delegates below. The crystalline minds attempting to process the implications experienced synchronous fracturing along their tertiary belief planes. Security fields activated automatically in response to the chaos, perceiving the collective panic as a potential attack. The chamber's defensive systems interpreting the human's unconscious state as possible sabotage initiated a localized time anomaly alert. The High Chancellor's form expanded in alarm, pressing against the quantum containment field that prevented energy beings from accidentally irradiating their physical colleagues. Emergency protocols engaged. announced the Council's semi-sentient administrative system. Calculating threat parameters. Unusual consciousness state detected. Possible mimetic attack in progress. The telepathic amalgam formed an emergency psychic barrier around the sleeping human, convinced they were witnessing some form of advanced psychological warfare. Do not observe directly, they warned, their unified voice echoing in the minds of all delegates. The human may be weaponizing vulnerability displays. The temporal observers, breaking their sacred neutrality, released a burst of future probability warnings, so severe that the chamber's chronological stabilizers briefly failed, causing everyone to experience the next 15 seconds simultaneously with the previous 10. Through it all, the human continued to sleep peacefully, their chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of natural rest. Their notebook had slipped slightly in their lap, the pen still loosely held between relaxed fingers. "What?" demanded the High Chancellor, when reality stabilized its voice, causing the chamber's molecular structure to vibrate. "Is happening?" The chief xenobiological expert floated forward its gelatinous form, now containing a rapidly updating human anatomical diagram. The human appears to be in a state their species calls napping. It explained, voice modulated to project scientific certainty, despite obvious confusion. It is a temporary consciousness shutdown used for neural maintenance and energy conservation. During an extinction-level briefing, the Chancellor's luminous form pulsed with disbelief. "Perhaps," offered the probability matrice's prime equation carefully. "This is evidence of a strategic dimension we have failed to calculate. The human species has surprised us before." This statement caused a fresh wave of speculation to ripple through the chamber. Earth, despite being the newest addition to the Council, had already developed a reputation for unconventional approaches. Their method of achieving faster-than-light travel, which they had casually referred to as just kind of folding space a bit, had rendered obsolete 3 millennia of quantum propulsion research. Their solution to the Paradox Nebula crisis, introducing what they called funny cat videos to the sentient time loop, had succeeded where the most sophisticated chronological manipulation had failed. "Consider the tactical implications," urged the martial theology representative, multiple combat-optimized limbs gesturing with religious fervor. To display such vulnerability in a crisis situation projects either suicidal disregard or unassailable confidence. This perspective rapidly gained traction. The Council species, many of whom never lowered their biological or technological defenses in public, began to see the human sleep state in a new light. To willingly enter an unconscious state, surrounded by 47 alien species while extinction loomed. What level of strategic certainty would that require? "They must possess a solution beyond our comprehension," whispered the Quantum Collective's primary node. Perhaps the sleep state itself is part of their plan. Their species has been known to claim inspiration arrives during unconsciousness. Or, suggested a gravitational purist from the chamber floor, its voice causing small objects to orbit its event horizon. They have already deployed countermeasures so effective that our warnings are redundant. The speculation might have continued indefinitely, if not for a small, unexpected sound from the human's adaptive chair. A snore, soft but unmistakable. The chamber went silent once more. The High Chancellor's luminous form dimmed to its most serious configuration. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of official inquiry. "We must know what the Earth representative knows," it declared. "The Council formally requests." The human stirred. 47 species froze simultaneously, sensory organs, consciousness matrices, and attention fields fixated on the slowly awakening diplomat. The human's eyes opened. They blinked twice, glanced at their watch, and straightened in their chair. Then, noticing the absolute stillness of the chamber and the focused attention of every delegate, they offered a somewhat sheepish smile. "Sorry about that," they said, voice carrying perfectly through the chamber's acoustic design. "Did I miss anything important?" The question hung in the air, its implications rippling through the collective consciousness of the Council. The human's casual dismissal of the briefing suggested either supreme arrogance or unimaginable strategic confidence. Before the chancellor could formulate a response, the human continued glancing at the holographic displays, which still showed the twin apocalyptic threats. "So, just to make sure I've got this right," they said, consulting their notebook, "we've got two problems: the quantum plague that's turning reality into metaphors, and the void locusts that eat empty space." "That is a severe simplification," the chancellor replied, luminosity fluctuating with barely contained stress, "but essentially correct." "Right." The human nodded, then pointed at the display showing the quantum plague's spread. "Have we tried feeding it social media content if it transforms things into metaphors? Maybe give it something that's already metaphorical self-reference?" The chamber's processing pause was almost audible. The quantum collective's primary node vibrated in confusion. What would this accomplish? The human shrugged, a gesture that the council's cultural database helpfully identified as indicating either casual certainty or complete indifference. Well, human social media platforms already operate on multiple layers of irony and self-reference. Memes that reference other memes that subvert expectations of the original reference. It's metaphors all the way down. Might keep the plague busy trying to transform something that's constantly transforming itself. The probability matrices began calculating frantically, their equations spinning in complex formations. After several seconds, their prime equation announced with evident surprise, preliminary models suggest a 72% chance of the quantum plague becoming trapped in recursive metaphorical loops, if exposed to sufficient quantities of what humans call shitposting. The human's smile widened slightly at the technical term. "Worth a try, right?" Before the council could fully process this unprecedented approach, the human turned to the other display showing the void locusts advance. "And these void locust things, they eat empty space, causing matter to collapse, yeah," the chancellor confirmed with a luminous pulse. "Why not just redirect them to parts of the galaxy no one cares about? The quantum plague is already ruining Sector 771, right? Let the locusts eat the emptiness there. They'd either cancel each other out or at least be contained in regions we've already written off." The council chamber erupted in overlapping technical objections, probability calculations, and procedural points of order. The gravitational purists were particularly vocal, their protest causing delegates on the chamber's lowest tier to float uncomfortably. The void locusts would simply accelerate the quantum plague's metaphorical transformations, objected the scientific consortium spokesperson, a being composed of pure intellectual abstraction, temporarily housed in a containment field. The resulting reality collapse would be, "But that's assuming the metaphors behave like normal spacetime." The human interrupted, leaning forward with unexpected animation. "If reality is already becoming metaphorical in plague regions, wouldn't the locusts end up eating the concept of emptiness rather than actual empty space? They might get stuck in a philosophical loop, trying to determine what nothing actually means." The philosophical quorum. A delegation normally content to observe from the contemplation tier suddenly activated their translation fields with unusual urgency. "The human raises a valid ontological paradox," their primary thinker announced. "If nothing becomes a metaphor, it simultaneously exists as a concept and not as a physical absence. The void locust's consumption mechanism relies on actual physical emptiness." The probability matrices ran new calculations, their equations visibly straining to incorporate the human suggestion. After what seemed an eternity, their prime equation reported, revised models indicate a 58% probability of mutual neutralization if the plague and locusts are strategically positioned to encounter each other. The human nodded again, as if this confirmed something obvious. "Sometimes the simplest solution is to let your problems fight each other." The High Chancellor's luminous form pulsed with reluctant consideration. "These proposals are unorthodox. They contradict 3,000 years of galactic crisis management protocols." "Sure," the human acknowledged with another casual shrug. "But your protocols haven't worked so far, right? Maybe it's time for some creative thinking. The statement, breathtaking in its diplomatic audacity, should have caused an interspecies incident. Instead, the chamber filled with a strange, unfamiliar sensation: hope. The Chancellor, after consulting briefly with its advisory wisps, made an unprecedented decision. We will implement the humans' suggestions as a parallel strategy while continuing our established protocols. The announcement triggered a flurry of activity. The Quantum Collective began calculating the optimal social media content to direct toward the plague, while the scientific consortium mapped potential containment zones where the locusts and plague might be introduced to each other. As the Council transformed from paralyzed terror to pragmatic action, the human diplomat leaned back in their chair, stretched, and returned to taking occasional notes. Several delegates noticed with alarm that they appeared to be drawing small doodles alongside their written observations. What none of the Council species realized, what would have been immediately obvious to any human observer, was that the Earth diplomat wasn't implementing some mastermind strategy at all. They had simply fallen asleep, due to a combination of jet lag, or rather its interstellar equivalent, after traveling through 17 wormholes to reach the Council chamber, the soothing hum of the chamber's environmental systems, and the monotonous delivery of apocalyptic information. The solutions they had offered were the kind of straightforward approaches that often occurred to humans precisely because they lacked the specialized hyper-complex frameworks that the Council species had developed over millennia of formal diplomatic training. When the chamber adjourned 16 hours later, the implementation teams were already deploying the human strategies. Initial reports were cautiously optimistic. The quantum plague had indeed become entrapped in analyzing Earth's social media archives, apparently fascinated by something called TikTok trends, and the evolving meaning of the term literally. Meanwhile, void locusts, introduced to plague-affected regions, showed signs of existential confusion, their consumption patterns slowing as they attempted to process whether they were eating actual emptiness or just the metaphorical concept of absence. As delegates filed out of the chamber, the xenobiological expert approached the human diplomat with scholarly curiosity. "If I may inquire," it began, transparent form, rippling with intellectual interest, "was your period of unconsciousness a deliberate cognitive technique to access innovative problem-solving capacities?" The human, gathering their notebook and straightening their jacket, paused. For a brief moment, they considered explaining the actual truth that they had simply dozed off during what they'd perceived as an overly technical briefing. Looking at the expert's expectant expression, however, they made a split-second diplomatic decision. "Something like that," they replied with a smile. "Sometimes you need to let your unconscious mind work on a problem." The expert recorded this response with evident excitement, its gelatinous form shimmering with academic satisfaction. "Fascinating. Our species achieves something similar through temporal lobe bifurcation, but requires specialized equipment. You appear to do it instinctively." As the human made their way out of the chamber, they found themselves the object of newfound respect. Delegates who had previously regarded Earth as a primitive curiosity now moved aside deferentially. Several attempted to emulate the human's walking gait with mixed success, depending on their number of limbs or locomotion method. "Your strategy has given us hope," the High Chancellor acknowledged as they reached the chamber's exit portal. Its luminous form had assumed a configuration that the human's cultural database identified as cautious optimism. "The Council is in your debt." The human, somewhat uncomfortable with the unearned acclaim but unwilling to undermine Earth's newly elevated standing, simply nodded. "Happy to help. Sometimes fresh eyes see simple solutions." "Indeed," the Chancellor agreed. "Your species' perspective is uniquely valuable." What neither the human nor the Chancellor could have predicted was how thoroughly this incident would transform interstellar diplomacy. 3 standard months later, both crises had been resolved with minimal additional casualties. The quantum plague had become so engrossed in analyzing human internet humor that it had forgotten to continue its reality-corrupting expansion, eventually evolving into a benign cosmic phenomenon that occasionally transformed uninhabited asteroids into visual puns. The void locusts, confronted with the philosophical paradox of consuming metaphorical emptiness, had reorganized themselves into what they termed space renovation specialists, focusing on consuming only the most aesthetically displeasing cosmic environments. The human diplomat returned to Earth, unaware that their accidental nap had become the subject of intense study throughout the galaxy. The War Council, convinced they had witnessed a masterful display of psychological warfare and creative problem-solving, established a new diplomatic doctrine, tactical nonchalance with intermittent consciousness, TNC. Council species invested vast resources in training their representatives to approximate the human's approach. Meditation chambers were installed in diplomatic vessels to facilitate what was now termed strategic unconsciousness. The empathic clouds developed elaborate techniques to simulate casual indifference during crisis briefings. The crystalline minds underwent painful restructuring to allow their facets to arrange in more relaxed configurations. None quite captured the authentic nonchalance of humanity, but their efforts marked a revolutionary shift in interstellar problem-solving. Complex issues previously trapped in procedural gridlock were suddenly approached with fresh, sometimes absurdly simple solutions. "What would the human do?" became a common refrain in council deliberations. On Earth, oblivious to their galactic legacy, the diplomat resumed their previous job as a mid-level foreign policy analyst. Their official report on the council meeting mentioned the quantum plague and void locust crises as successfully resolved through collaborative effort, with no reference to their impromptu nap or off-the-cuff suggestions. Their only personal note was a request that future Earth representatives be provided with stronger coffee during extended sessions. Meanwhile, in the Grand Galactic War Council chamber, a small but significant modification appeared one standard year after the incident. The adaptive ergonomic chair once occupied by Earth's diplomat had been mounted on a raised platform encased in a preservation field with a small plaque in 47 languages. The plaque, translated to Earth English, read simply, "Upon this chair, humanity taught the galaxy to nap in the face of apocalypse, and thereby saved us all." New delegates were routinely brought to observe this installation during their orientation. Most found it incomprehensible that such a mundane object could hold such diplomatic significance. The wiser among them, however, recognized a profound truth. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to close one's eyes, trust in the unconscious mind, and approach overwhelming complexity with well-rested simplicity. When the next galactic crisis inevitably arose, a dimensional folding that threatened to compress 12 star systems into a pocket universe, the War Council did something unprecedented. Before engaging their advanced technologies or implementing emergency protocols, they deliberately scheduled a 3-hour recess for strategic contemplation. Across 47 species, delegates found quiet spaces, dimmed their sensory inputs, and attempted to access what humans called sleeping on the problem. When they reconvened, their solutions were remarkably straightforward, practical, and effective. The human diplomat never learned that they had fundamentally transformed interstellar crisis management. But somewhere deep in council archives, beside records of averted apocalypses and diplomatic breakthroughs, there remained a single image, a sleeping human in a swivel chair, unwittingly teaching the galaxy that sometimes the most powerful response to crisis is simply to take a nap.